There has been immense political pressure on the British Prime Minister to consider his position to step down, resign, not just from the opposition, but a small number of MPs within his own party too. The situation around Keir Starmer has reached a crisis point since the mass publication 9 days ago of the Epstein files by the US government. He isn't implicated, but the man he chose as US Ambassador, Peter Mandelson, is. He's resigned in disgrace last September after leaked emails surfaced over his relationship with a convicted child abuser, Jeffrey Epstein. He now faces a criminal investigation as a result of the latest release, alleged to have emailed confidential government financial information, which he denies. Now, the question of judgment for Keir Starmer: how was it that Mr Mandelson got through the vetting process? Keir Starmer says he didn't realise the, quote, depth and darkness of the relations. Today, this man, Morgan McSweeney, has gone, resigned, the Chief of Staff to Keir Starmer. It was his fault, the appointment, he says. Well, let's go to the UK. Let's bring in James Lyons, the former director of Downing Street Communications under Sir Keir Starmer from 2024 to 2025. Welcome to France 24, James. Let me first start by asking you, you know Morgan McSweeney and Keir Starmer well. Was he right to resign? And if so, has the right person resigned?
Sure. Good evening, and thank you very much indeed for speaking to me this evening. I think I was surprised by the timing of this announcement. The Sunday papers are always a source of fear and trepidation when you're in government, but actually the papers this morning didn't bring any fresh, damaging revelations. There was nothing in them that would have necessarily required Morgan's resignation this afternoon. So my initial reaction is one of huge surprise.
From that, and from a conversation I've just had with a British historian, a political historian, who was suggesting perhaps there might be more to come in the days ahead.
Well, absolutely. Last week in Parliament, the Conservatives forced the government to agree to release all communications between ministers and advisors and Peter Mandelson. And this means that there is potentially an avalanche of documents to come. Nobody knows quite what is buried in there. And it could well be that, there are communications in there that are nothing to do with Peter Mandelson's appointment as ambassador to the US, but nevertheless are going to cause huge embarrassment and damage to senior members of the government.
When you saw this playing out, I don't know if you sensed a slow motion crisis coming to a head here. And if so, is this a crisis of Keir Starmer's own making?
Nobody can underestimate, how difficult this period is going to be should underestimate how difficult this period is going to be for the Prime Minister. He is in a very, very difficult spot. I do think that some of his critics and some of Morgan McSweeney's critics are being very wise after the fact. The information there was information in the public domain that Peter Mandelson had maintained some sort of contact with Jeffrey Epstein after his conviction. But despite that, Peter Mandelson, when he was appointed ambassador to the US, was very much a public figure. He was the chancellor of one university. He was in the running to become chancellor of Oxford University. And he was the star of a podcast, which is a firm favourite in Westminster. And although obviously he's very well known that he'd resigned from the British cabinet on 2 separate occasions. I'm old enough to have followed him around the broadcast studios when he was fighting to keep his job the second time as a young political journalist. He hadn't gone on to serve with apparent distinction, both as a European Commissioner and as Gordon Brown's de facto number 2 in the last Labour government. Now, we now know that Mandelson was involved in some extraordinary breaches of confidence and trust while he was in that role as Gordon Brown's deputy. But the extraordinary exchanges with Epstein about Euro bailouts and the Prime Minister's resignation and all sorts of things, none of that had come to light until the last few days and the latest publication of the Epstein files. So none of this was known by the government when Peter Mandelson was appointed. And in fact, it couldn't have been, because extraordinarily, he was conducting government business from a BT private email account.
But it takes us, I guess, to the point around Peter Mandelson and the fact that if you have a situation you've just referred to right at the beginning, we've seen a resignation, and from what's around today, doesn't seem to be any more news, and yet we wait for this latest release within Downing Street of material. I mean, can I ask you whether you think, at the time you were in office when Mr. Mandelson presumably was appointed as US ambassador, did you work with him? Did you give an opinion? You asked your opinion from Keir Starmer of whether you thought he should have had that post, and would you have said any differently at the time?
No, I wasn't part of the discussions around Peter's appointment. By the time I found out about it, it was a done deal. I think nobody was under any illusions that appointing Peter Mandelson was a risk, but it was a calculated risk because he was seen as someone who would do a good job of getting alongside Donald Trump and the Donald Trump administration, which in fact he did do in the role.
Now, a couple of thoughts. One, I'd like to know how much harder you think life is going to be in Downing Street for Keir Starmer, both politically and personally, the loss of Morgan McSweeney and the effect that it will affect, the extent to which it will affect him. And the other point to which you will be going, your time as a seasoned journalist, at the Times and the Mirror in the past, that you will be going to get the paper in the morning or clicking online to see perhaps revelations in the morning.
Well, look,
should we expect something soon?
Yeah, well, look, I think we're waiting for these documents. There's been a curveball thrown by the Metropolitan Police, who are, as I understand it, holding up publication of at least some of these documents because there is a criminal investigation underway. Peter Mandelson's houses were searched in the last couple of days, and the police are anxious not to interfere with that. So I don't expect that we'll see any of that imminently. But look, in terms of the effect that this will have on the Prime Minister and the running of Downing Street, it is very, very hard or it's impossible actually to overstate the importance of Morgan McSweeney in the government operation. It was often hard to work out whether Morgan McSweeney was an important part of Keir Starmer's project or Keir Starmer was an important part of Morgan McSweeney's project. But I think it's fair to say that since the summer, actually, Morgan has been taking more of a back seat, and his deputies, Vidya and Jill, who are stepping up to the role full time now, have sort of shouldered more of the burden. But yeah, I think this is a big blow to the kind of day-to-day running of the government. And in terms of the Prime Minister's longer-term prospects, I think his departure makes it harder for the Prime Minister to survive.
I spoke earlier to a man that knows about dealing with crisis management after being convicted for expenses corruption, Dennis McShane, former Europe Minister, and he said he's not toast, Keir Starmer, but he's in the toaster. What do you make of that?
A lively analogy, as I would expect from Dennis, who's also a former journalist. I think there is a path through this for the Prime Minister, but the truth is Morgan McSweeney's departure today makes that path much narrower and much steeper. He's gone today, which means he can't go when these messages and communications with Peter Mandelson are finally published. And actually, one of the many roles that Morgan has fulfilled in government is to act as a lightning rod for criticism from the press or sections of it, and just as much so actually from people inside the Labour Party.
Really good to talk to you tonight. Thank you, James. James Lyons, former director. Thank you. Downing Street Communications under Keir Starmer 2024 to 2025.